Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Leadnap Gaming. Today we're talking about the ARAK M70 rocket system for the AJS-37 Viggen for DCS World. The M70 rocket pod has a loaded weight of 387 kilograms. It's 104 kilograms empty. It contains 6 135mm rockets. These are salvo fired and they release in just over half a second. It's important to understand here, because this seems to confuse people at times. Typically, as we all know, rockets are fired and we get the firing interval. In this case, people would confuse this to be just over half a second interval, meaning it would take about just over 3 seconds to fire all 6 rockets. It's actually the other way around in this case. In just over half a second, all 6 rockets will be released because they're released at the same time. So, up to 4 pods can be carried. This is on the 2, 3, 5, and 6 pylons. The 2 and 6 pylons can be utilized for countermeasures, however, meaning that you can carry 12 or 24 rockets as you desire. If you were really crazy and wanted to trim out, which isn't very hard to do in the Viggen, you could carry 3 pods. And yeah. So, there are 2 rocket types available, high explosive and armor piercing or anti-tank. I will refer to these as anti-tank, though some documentation refers to them as armor piercing. We'll get into that here shortly. The pods can carry a mixed complement, but are generally loaded only for one or the other types based on the mission requirement. In DCS world, you can only select the pod to be one or the other. You can't mix the complement, but you can mix the pods. So you could opt to take 2 pods of HE and 2 pods of AT, or 1 and 1, depending on however you wanted to do that. The M70 rockets, as mentioned, come in 2 varieties. First, the SHU-70 high explosive. You can see the actual Swedish name there below. It's a 45.8 kilogram rocket. It has 3.7 kilograms of TNT for a warhead. It's 2,105 millimeters in length. It has a great blast radius. It's very effective against structures and open targets. In the mission editor, it's in there as ARAK M70B-HE. Now, next up is the PSHU-70, which is the anti-tank. Again, in the mission editor, this is referred to as M70B-AP for armor piercing, but you'll see that I'm going to keep saying anti-tank, and I say that on the basis, right, that the easy way to tell them apart is that Panzer is Swedish for tank, which is obviously similar to the German Panzer, which we're all familiar with. P is for Panzer. So you can obviously see, if you hadn't figured it out on your own already, right, PSHU-70 just simply means the anti-tank variant. So if you know it as the anti-tank variant, it's really easy to kind of keep apart. So the anti-tank variant is slightly lighter at 44.6 kilograms, but it has a larger 5 kilogram hextol shaped charge, which is composition B and C4. Composition B, also known as C4. It is 65 millimeters longer than the HE variant, so that's really interesting to me that it's lighter but longer, has a bigger warhead. It is a smaller area of effect. If you understand shaped charges, you really understand that it's really only going to damage what it specifically hits. But it is much more effective against armor. Weapons deployment. Unlike the fantastic suite of guided weapons that we have on the Viggen, this system is entirely dependent on you identifying the target and deploying the weapons directly. That doesn't mean that these weapons are not just a lot of fun to use. I had a lot of fun learning, practicing, and filming for this. Rockets, they're just a lot of fun, and the explosions look beautiful, and it's one of the only times it's directly in front of you when you fly. That, however, doesn't mean that the same level of pre-mission planning shouldn't be undertaken. And I think people get it confused on this because the quick mission just throws you in and you're flying kind of cat mission or something, and you suddenly, well, it couldn't be cat because you're armed for ground attack, but you're flying along and it suddenly says, oh, hey, there's a column of tanks moving that's going to cross this bridge. Go attack them with rockets. And then you're kind of attacking them really like an A-10 would, except, yeah, Okay, you can kind of see it's a little weird. It's not to say you can't do that. And when we get into firing modes, that would be a perfect example of using the quick mode. But really, you can see that in the architecture of the entire thing, these are salvo fired. They all fire. You're going to dump all 24 rockets in less than a second onto the target. You're not going to fire a few now, fire a few later, fire a few an hour from now. You're going to get in, dump them, and get out. So that pre-planning element's really, really important. The system, just like I mentioned, is designed for the entire release of the stores and evasion. So I can't really say it any more ways. It's still a Viggen mission, and it still requires a lot of pre-planning. Now, what also matters in that then is that your release attitude plays a really large role in the impact definition, and we're going to talk about that in a few slides. But the importance of that, right, is if you're flying a Hind, right, and you've got a bunch of these rockets, and you're hitting a tank formation, you're going to fire a few rockets, you're going to re-aim, fire a few rockets, re-aim, fire a few rockets. You're going to define your impact area yourself. With the Viggen, you're dumping all your rockets off at once. So what you're going to have to consider is that different attitudes are going to define different impact areas. And like I said, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of put that in now because we have it up now. So you can deploy these either in ANF for the standard release, in NAV for the quick release, or a long-range mode, which is still in ANF, and again, we'll cover all of those individually. Pre-flight, your weapon selector needs to be in attack. Your sight mode selector is irrelevant. Your release mode selector is going to be in series, unless you're doing the long-range deployment, and then you're in impulse. The target mode selector doesn't really matter in this case. So mission planning. Don't be afraid to consider less conventional approaches, though do consider the trade-offs and overall theater threats. What does that mean? Well, so when I was flying, like I said, I did a lot of rocket attacks in preparation for this, partly because they're a lot of fun. But when you're flying the Viggen, and, you know, we typically like to fly up canyons because it gives us protection from radar and whatnot. But I tried a couple of attacks where I would come up a different canyon and then pop up over the ridge line and follow the slope down onto my target. And what I found is when I did that, it gave me a lot longer to spot my target and aim. Because again, you're going to have, you will have your target waypoint, which means you'll have a HUD indication for the M waypoint, but you kind of have to spot your target, and that can be really hard when you're trying to find tanks and trees, for example, or in a city, as often was my example. Now, you could, assuming they weren't in the city and were just kind of out in the open, use radar to really fix the waypoint. But I found that it definitely helped having more time to spot the targets. More time to spot the targets and aim also gave them more time to spot the targets and aim. And I did get shot down quite a bit at times. So, important things to consider. Like I said, the utilization of the pop-up point, U waypoints are strongly encouraged. Again, it goes back to pre-planning. But I really, try different things. Rockets, I think, were one of the best ways to really practice the ground attack role for the Viggen. When you're plotting waypoints, it's important to note that in ANF, automatic waypoint cycling is disabled. So, and this is only going to affect a small number of you. If you plot a B waypoint close to your target waypoint and you rely on non-bound keys to change your master modes, which I would recommend you bind some keys to change your master modes, but you'll inevitably have to change the waypoint as well. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if I put a navigational waypoint either a mile ahead, before my target waypoint, or one after, and the after is being a little less important, traveling at high speed, right? I'm flying nap of the Earth. I've probably already dumped myself over to ANF. The target waypoint's not going to pop up. So when you're mission planning, my advice is make sure that you give yourself, put your last navigational waypoint in with enough time that you're going to make it. You're going to make your turn as it auto selects the target waypoint, and then you'll be able to pop yourself into ANF. So again, here we kind of have my not so great graphics to kind of define what we were talking about, the definition of the impact area. So you can see here that if your release access is shallow, right, the rockets are going to travel over a long area. So if you are trying to attack a fueling column that's on the side of the road, if you come in line with, parallel to the, in parallel with the road at a shallow release axis, you're going to be able to spread death and chaos over the length of the column. If you take a steep release axis, right, so your attitude, you're basically coming down on them, your impact area is going to be much tighter, which is ideal if you're trying to attack like a road checkpoint, for example, something that isn't very long. Granted, the long area of impact isn't going to be super long unless you're really shallow, and even then it's not going to be that long. So let's talk about quick mode deployment. So this is when you're in nav. So quick mode, the target motion measurement and radar ranging is not used. This is pretty much entirely on you, the pilot, to scope out. In flight, it's really, like I said, it's used if in flight and there's a target of opportunity that appears. Under ideal circumstances, you would have the time to determine and enter QFE into your primary altimeter. Failure to enter the QFE data will result in a poor firing cue and accuracy, again because motion measurement and radar ranging is not being used. Orient yourself to the target, unsafe the trigger, fire inside the HUD indicated release envelope, evade, and safe your trigger. Standard deployment, which we're going to spend the most time on. Again, this is when you're going to actually be in ANF. Your release mode switches in series. Set your target QFE, approach the target, switch to ANF. Once the attitude is stable and the reticle is on target, unsafe the trigger. That's really important. Fire during indicated release envelope on the HUD, evade, safe the trigger, and return to nav. Long-range deployment offers a greater degree of standoff from the target, though it's less accurate. Obviously, you're making a compromise. You're giving up close aiming and the closer kind of spread of your rockets to gain a little bit of distance. Your release mode switch is going to be an impulse, which is what's going to tell the system you're doing a long-range deployment. You're going to set your QFE on your primary altimeter. You're going to disable target motion measurement. That's address block 21, value 1, so 211000. And disable radar ranging, which is address block 25, value 3, 253000. So long-range deployment, it's pretty much the standard release from here, right? You're going to drop into master mode once you approach your target. With your attitude stable and reticle on target, you're going to unsafe your trigger. You're going to fire when the parameters are fulfilled, when the little wings are displayed, and you're going to evade, safe the trigger, and return to nav. So let's talk about the HUD. Now, again, in this case, I'm only going to cover the HUD for the standard deployment. That's because it's the same for long-range deployment, and the cues are generally identical for quick deployment. They're only going to appear when you unsafe, and you're not going to see things like the fin for radar ranging. So, as we kind of go down the list here, straight from the manual, the first one, number 1 there, is obviously us just flying in nav. Once you switch to ANF, your target indicator ring is going to appear on the target position. That is, again, based on the M waypoint, not some sort of fantastical, it's following the column or something like that. You're going to bring your vector indicator, the little dot, into the ring. So inside this orange kind of dotted lines I put on here, it's to explain to you, you're going to kind of get either or of these or see them both. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think people get confused that they have to see these in linear fashion. So ranging via triangulation is when you're going to start getting that distance line and everything like that. To get that, you kind of have to be in the parameters for it. So your sight line relative to the horizon needs to be greater than 5 degrees. If, at this point radar ranging is possible, if you are doing radar ranging, the fin will appear up at the top. So, again, those are just kind of indications over how you're calculating your firing solution. So, at this point, you're going to unsafe your trigger, the target indicator ring disappears, and target motion measurement and radar ranging are used. So, at this point, the system, when you're pointed at and you unsafe the trigger, the system is rather smart. If you are targeting, say, a convoy of trucks and it's moving, your firing solution is going to move with those vehicles. And that's why it's so important that you unsafe with the dot in the ring on the target. Or with the dot on the target, even if the ring is off, if that made sense. So 2 seconds before the firing line, the distance line is going to flash. We've seen that before with bomb release. When the wings appear, press and hold the trigger. So again, this is a point of both contention and confusion, and I'm sure someone in the comments is going to tell me I'm wrong. Half a second before, and the way this is worded is really poorly, half a second before you enter the firing envelope, the wings are going to appear on your dot, right? In theory, this is giving you the heads up that you need to press and hold the trigger. I'm telling you, when you see it, press and hold the trigger, because your OODA loop is going to be slower than you think it is on paper here, right? You're getting the distance line flashing to begin to prepare you, right? That the whole point of that is to allow you to orient so that you can start making that decision process faster. But in a half a second, you're going to see the line, you're going to process you see the line, you're trying to do a bunch of other things, and you're going to press and hold the trigger. So just when you see the wings, press and hold the trigger. Once you press the trigger, the altitude numbers are going to switch from the left to the right side. We've seen that before too, and that's very common. Though I do want to point out that unlike some other things where the wings appear as a firing cue, you can see here that our distance line, and that's why that orange arrow appears, is there to show you you're just outside the firing envelope. Unlike other releases, the firing envelope with the distance line is what it always is. So you're seeing that your wings are appearing just outside the entrance of the envelope, and that as we fly in, we're inside the envelope. The weapons are released and the trigger's released. When the weapons are gone, your followed last light's going to come on. Obviously, when you release the trigger, the altitude number is going to flip back over. At this point, you're going to evade to avoid fragments, right? So unlike, say, illumination bombing, where you're pulling up in 5Gs, and the 5Gs is actually critical for the release of the munition. In this case, 5Gs is the idea is that you just always pull into a 5G. I'm going to write evade to avoid fragments, because the truth is that you could pull up at 1G, you could turn hard right at 5Gs. Any of these options is arguably good based on the terrain. You've already fired them. So the 5G element of this is not critical for the release of the munition, like it is with certain bombing modes in illumination bombing, for example. So if you enter the fragmentation zone, you're going to get the kind of little bars there on the side. I wrote here, as soon as you've not fired yet, because here's the thing. If you've already fired, you should be evading anyways, and at that point, there's nothing more you can really do. The only time that those bars are going to appear that it's going to really matter is if you actually haven't fired yet, because it won't let you fire, and because it means you're probably about to crash into the ground. Anyhow, once you release the trigger, safe it, the ring is going to appear, and at that point, you can return yourself back to nav. You probably aren't really going to see that, because if you're like me, you're going to release that bad boy, you're going to safe the trigger, and you're going to pop yourself over to master mode nav anyways, and you're more busy trying to avoid mountains and stuff because you're at just a few feet off the deck, and hoping that whatever it was behind you got smashed by rockets and isn't shooting back at you. So let's go ahead, jump in the cockpit, and see this all in action. Okay, so now that we're in cockpit, I'm going to go ahead, put myself to attack. We're automatically already in series, and I'm going to put my target waypoint in now just because I hadn't done so. The next thing we're going to do is set our QFE. Now you get this from your kneeboard. I already knew what it was because I'd done it a bunch of times. And now that we fast forwarded a little bit, here we are, we're going to start our dive. We're already in ANF, and we're unsafing just as the dot passes through the ring on the dive. See the flashing, see the wings. There's the release. I should start evading now. As you can see, I'm entering the fragment zone, but I wanted to see the good effect on target. So now you can see this is a kind of casual evasion. But even with this kind of simplistic evasion, you're going to see I'm going to look back here in a moment, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not being chased by a SAM. Probably should have looked back a little sooner since I could talk about it in that period of time. But I'm going to close up while we circle back to do our BDA. Let me know down in the comments below anything I missed, anything that you found helps. And while we circle back to look at the damage, I just want to say thanks for watching. And don't forget to hit subscribe. Look at that good effect on target. Anyhow, folks, I will catch you next time.